Wood Buffalo. There are a lot of elements to it, which these guys are going to walk us through. There is the immediate evacuation, which was unprecedented. I mean, trying to do the evacuation of close to 90,000 inhabitants in the matter of time that they did is one thing. And then managing that whole wildfire, managing all the incoming from the media, from residents, from local authorities, and then the coordination between all of the various levels of government, the NGOs, and all the other, I mean, really, really complicated. Then you get into reentry, which is now bringing all of those 90,000 inhabitants back into the community, equally intense and complicated, and also opportunities for some really interesting creative programming that these guys did as well. And then moving into recovery. And each, I think, has its own, in terms of all of those stages, complexities and intensities in different ways. And some people have said now that we're into sort of the recovery, in some cases that's, and these guys are going to talk about that, probably even more complex than some of the initial things around the wildfire and crisis itself. But to kick things off, guys, I mean, because it doesn't matter how long you've been in communications, whether you've done a lot of issues in crisis community, no one can prepare for something of this magnitude and scale. But on May 3rd, and you talked a little bit about it, Jordan, you guys were in an unprecedented situations, and you had to make some really, really fundamental decisions quickly, both on a professional level in terms of doing it, but also on a personal level. And I think it's important for this group to also to understand not only the strategies and technical elements that come into managing something of this magnitude, but also what it means in terms of those personal decisions, because it's unprecedented. Unless you're there, you really can't fathom.
Yeah, so initially what happened was, I got called in actually on Sunday on May 1st, and so what happened was the fire had actually started then, and our REOC kicked off on the May 1st, and I went in for the overnight shift. So I had a little bit of a taste of what was to come that first night. We found out very early on that at 5 a.m. Mountain Time is when the Eastern news cycle starts, so right when you're at your peak level of exhaustion, everybody in Toronto wants to find out exactly what you're doing. So that made things a little interesting from the get-go, but it gave us a little bit of ability to anticipate what would be forthcoming down the road. So when the actual evacuation hit, and there was a clip of the press conference that was held at 11 a.m., by 4 a.m. by 4 p.m., evacuation notices have been issued for everyone in the municipality. So we actually did a staged evacuation through every sort of community. We actually had to split the direction of the evacuation from north and south. We used the bridge, which is sort of in the middle of our community, as a dividing line. But around a communication standpoint, what was really interesting was that everything around us is sort of crumbling in the sense that we couldn't be issuing news releases in a typical situation like you might do. We also only had 2 of us available to actually do it at that point in time because our staff had been cut off and they were north of us, and we couldn't get down to the REOC. And then beyond that, we were looking at going like a rate of change that was unprecedented. So when you're talking about changing your evacuations at that level of pace, you don't have time to actually go out and issue a complete or do a full comms program around each one of those changes, just because it's such a significant change so quickly. So what we actually had to do, and what we ended up working out really, really well for us was, I think it's also, I should backstep a second too, we have a really good standing relationship with our local media. So we do a lot of outreach with them. We actually know them on a personal level as well. So that really benefited us because we knew that everything that we said would be amplified because our community really cares about one another. So having that already in place was a huge fundamental pillar to what we were doing, and knowing that that existed and being aware of that was really good for us. So then we started issuing our notices, and we actually had to do them through Twitter because the rate of change was so aggressive.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things we found is that you start with your traditional toolkit of news releases, your kind of email pitch, your phone pitches, and then all of your social tools. But very quickly, as Jordan said, is like, any new information you get in that situation, as soon as you get it, it's already old. Something has already happened. It's made the situation worse, or the factors that you are trying to explain to someone have shifted drastically. I mean, in the span of minutes, a fire can cross the highway, hit a gas station, and blow the gas station up. And that's why there's only 2 of us in the REOC at that time, because our other teammates were stuck on the other side of a highway on fire. I mean, that's a couple of minutes. It was very challenging to try to put that into context in a news release, which is why we pretty much dumped it right away. And social media really became the go-to tool for us. Facebook was valuable from a broadcast sense where we could just send information out and it's shareable, but it really didn't give us the ability to communicate back and forth with people, which I think is what really did pay dividends in those first 12, 24, 36 hours where, we were making decisions that would affect potentially, whether or not you have 100 or 200 cars driving down a road into a fire or away from it, and being able to have a very responsive, reactive communication. Twitter was, that was the best tool in the moment. It also allowed us to use the hashtagging function to see what was, not through any malicious intent, but you see misinformation start to spread in any crisis, big or small. And in one this big, when you're trying to move 88,000 people out, everyone has an opinion. So Twitter was a very useful tool for us to counter those waves. You see them sort of like a ripple in a pond, and you could spot it and you could stop it and correct it. At about 1:30 in the afternoon, we had to start evacuating the south end of Thickwood, which is in Uptown across the river. And the first neighborhood north of the river to get hit is Wood Buffalo. That the fire even got across the river is very much an anomaly. Typically, a fire will never jump a 1 kilometer wide river, which speaks to how much of a statistical anomaly the fire was. But if you drove down Rail Martin Drive, you were going into a fire. And trying to get people up out of Wood Buffalo and onto the main road out, it was really interesting to see people saying, where's the fire? What direction is it going in, and seeing people say, well, it's coming from the golf course, which is where it's coming from, or to see someone else say, well, it's coming up the water treatment plant. Two very different locations. It's critical to understand whether or not it's coming from the north or the east or the west side of that area, because you have one route out. You need to know how to get those people moving.
So maybe just quickly describe in terms of that initial REOC team, because obviously you guys were the two communicators pushing that out. Talk to us about that sort of group, that team that were feeding you the information to get out.
Sure. So the REOC's based off the incident command system. So that's what we were using to actually do the entire operation. And so what really worked for us was that we had direct access to the key decision makers. So the way everyone who's involved is actually in the same room, and we were really fortunate to have just stood down from our seasonal flood mitigation or flood risk. So we were actually all sort of familiar with one another initially as well, which also really helped. But we had all our key partners right in the room. So we had we had ACCO, which is our utilities provider. We had initially for example, family and child services representatives sort of thing. So we had the community services area. So they were helping arrange for places to stay. The RCMP was in the room. BILO was in the room. Fire ops was also there. So really everyone was there. The director of emergency management, who at that time was Darby Allen, he was in it right there as well. So from an approval standpoint, which allowed us to be really fluid in the way that we were putting out our information, we got it like that. We just had to go, are you guys good with this going? And they would go read it and say, yeah, and we would hit send. And that was literally it from an approval standpoint.
It was very easy to build up trust with someone when they're in the room next to you. One of the challenges we found later is that when the Provincial Operations Center stood up, the POC, is that they're in Edmonton. We're in Fort McMurray, and it's a lot harder to build trust, and it's a lot harder to have discussion with someone when they're on the other end of the phone, or you're not even in phone contact yet. The ICS Incident Command System, it's a modular system that is used to manage. You can use it to manage a planned event, or to do something like this where you're tackling a disaster. It's very easy to scale up, and all those players that are in the room, they know what the formula is, they know what team they're on, they know what their role is. So it did make it very easy for people to just drop in and do their job. And it's very clear who you report to and what your task is. So that was a pretty huge benefit to us, is that everyone understood that system and could mesh with it.